I'd like to welcome everybody today to our workshop. This is the first in the new Career Development Office workshop, a virtual workshop series. Today's workshop, Managing Career Anxiety, is very timely, but it was actually planned long before the current crisis hit. In today's workshop, Dr. Scott Cypers, who's the Director of Stress and Anxiety Programs at the Depression Center, is going to talk with us about general ways to address anxiety and how to specifically confront some of the anxiety that can present related to our careers. During the workshop, go ahead and please ask your questions in the chat function. You can ask them if it's something to the group or just private, that's fine. If you share those with us, I will ask them on your behalf. There's also going to be some work time. So in addition to the foods that Scott asked you to get, there are going to be a couple exercises where you'll need to write some things down. So also please have a paper and pen handy. And then finally, as I mentioned, there's a brief post-workshop evaluation. That's an online survey. I've pasted that in the chat function. If you want to copy and paste that into your browser now, that would probably be helpful. I tried to make it a link, but I have not yet figured out how to do that successfully. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Scott, and we will have plenty of time at the end of the session to get into questions as well.
And folks, thank you. I know how much our time can be, how precious time is, especially now, and some people have more of it and some people have less of it. So thank you for spending this time with us, and I do hope it's beneficial. And it's a really interesting time to be having this talk today, given that we are dealing with a pandemic, and we may have had anxiety before, and many of you are still operating as postdocs and figuring out careers. And there's a lot of things that may have changed and the landscape may be changing. So I appreciate, again, you taking the time, and hopefully there's some beneficial things that we can take from this talk. And so the first thing, before we jump in specifically to anxiety, I want you to start to orient yourself to think of your brain a little differently. And I want you to think of your brain a little more like a band. And what I mean by that, each player in your brain and each bandmate is trying to do something else, but the goal of the entire band is to make sweet music. And when the band is working well together, the music sounds great. But when any part of the band starts to get out of whack, to play too loud, to stop listening to the other parts of the band, things can go awry. So you can see sort of a visual description of the whole band. But now let's talk a little more about each player. And the first player we want to talk about is what I like to call smart brain. And again, in my generation of growing up, this was one of my favorite bands, was U2. So you can see the lead singer of U2 there is Bono. And again, our smart brain kind of, if you want to think about the biological correspondence, it kind of corresponds to our frontal lobe. And our frontal lobe kind of has two really big goals, or things it's trying to do. It is trying to slow down and think about goals. What do we want out of life? What do we value? What do we care about? What do we want to be doing? And its job is to kind of slow down and set goals around those things. And when we achieve those goals, we develop a sense of satisfaction. And that's kind of what we're going for, is satisfaction. At the same time, another really important part of the lead singer's job is to make sure and listen to the other parts of the band and make sure they're playing in harmony and that the music is sounding right. And so that is sort of the job of smart brain. And then whenever we set a goal, so maybe one of your goals right now is to work out a little more, because we do know that's really helpful for mental health. As soon as you set a goal, built into our smart brain is a little bit of another player that I like to call coach. And coach's job is our motivation system. And coach's job is to try to push us to achieve our best. and trying to help us, again, achieve any of the goals we set. And when I've explored the different kind of coaches in our head, they usually boil down to these kind of 4 archetypes. Some of us have hybrids or different things, but these are the elements of some of the coaches we might have in our head. So there's critical coach, who is going to use a lot of criticality to try to motivate us. So remember that goal that I threw out, that goal to work out a little more. This is how critical coach might try to get you to work out. You fat ass lazy piece of poop. You're pathetic. Get your butt out there, go for a run. Get yourself moving. If you have more of a guilty coach in your head, guilty coach is going to use guilt to try to motivate you. You're letting your family down. You're letting yourself down. You should feel really upset that you're not working out more. The third kind of coach is what I like to call doubting coach. And doubting coach is going to just doubt your ability to achieve that goal. And what doubting coach wants you to do is go, oh yeah, I'll show you. You don't think I can go for a run? Watch me. But a lot of times we don't realize it's a doubting coach, and we wind up believing the doubt and not doing. And then the last coach is healthy coach. And healthy coach uses a lot more positivity and belief in your ability to achieve. It might say, if you want to work out more, you'll do it. You got this. I believe in you. And again, when we look at the literature on motivation, we tend to see that healthier coaches actually lead to more production. But a lot of times people don't believe that, and they really stick to and want to hold on to some of these other coaches to try to motivate. And you can see some archetypes of those coaches or some of the pictures you see on the screen right now. In my vision of a healthy coach, I do believe Michelle Obama is one of those people. And one of my favorite ones she says, when they go low, we go high. But trying to motivate through positivity. Another one more you can see in the middle if you grew up in the 70s and 80s is Bobby Knight and Coach K. Bobby Knight might be thought of as the archetype of critical coach. He really believed you have to break your players down to build them up. And he was very critical to the point he was thrown out of his job for throwing chairs and being, again, really abusive to his players. And then the last one is actually one of the most winning coaches in the NBA of all time. And his name is Phil Jackson. So I'm a huge Lakers fan. And Phil Jackson came to us late. But he had a big belief in letting players and trusting players to figure it out and creating situations that would allow players to do that. So I want you to take a minute and even feel free to chat on the chat function. Think about what kind of coach you typically have in your head, guiding your motivation, trying to push you. And one of the things I want to talk about or kind of have you think about, people with anxiety, what kind of coach do you think they typically have motivating them? And usually anxious people tend to find it's a more of a critical, a guilty, it's one of these more unhealthy coaches. So one of the first things as you're typing or chatting that away, one of the things you kind of want to start thinking about is how might I be able to bring a healthier coach in my head to motivate me? So take a second and send those chats and think about what kind of coaches we see. And let's see if I can go to the chat function really fast. And again, feel free to just type any of the coaches you typically or you recognize that you might have more in your head trying to motivate you. And thank you. And then from there, folks, that is sort of the first part of our brain. But then at the same time, after that, then the next big player is emotion brain. And I love to think of this as the rhythm section, because lyrics without rhythm doesn't make beautiful music. You need a little bit of both. And our emotion brain is sort of, think about it as our limbic system. And look at the movie Inside Out is a beautiful story of emotion brain and what happens when we don't take care of our emotions. And our emotion brain, I find, is focused on two different things. It's focused on, first off, what are our underlying needs and what makes us happy. It's not thinking about what's the healthiest way to do it. It's thinking about what's the quickest way or the way that takes away pain or brings me pleasure the quickest. So if you're having a rough day and you're feeling upset, what's the quickest way that your brain learned to feel less upset? That might be some stress eating with food. That might be trying to take a nap. That might be picking a fight. None of these are healthy ways to deal with being upset, but that's what our emotion brain wants us to do. And when our band is working well together, our smart brain is paying attention to what we're feeling and trying to help us find healthy ways to achieve that. And one of the things I've been doing with all the people I've been working with, every time we meet, especially during COVID-19, I try to have them really pay attention to their emotion brain and really deep down into that part of their brain to what they might be craving. And I ask people to kind of think about, what are you craving right now? And that can change every couple days. And during COVID-19, a lot of these are the cravings I've heard. Feeling lonely, feeling like Groundhog's Day, feeling bored, feeling angry, feeling sad. And as we find these feelings that come up in our emotion brain, what I'll challenge you, and that's the thing I've seen that's impressed me the most, is figuring out with your creativity in your smart brain, healthy ways to try to build that in to take care of that craving, so that that craving doesn't grow or sneak up on you or take over. So kind of think about it. And if you want to chat too and just send in, when you do that kind of work and you tune into what you might be craving right now emotionally, kind of think about it and just chat it out. And then if you can, start thinking about what might be a healthy way to get that met. So imagine you're feeling kind of stir crazy. What might be a healthy way? And I'll give you one tip. Some people are finding just going for a drive is a beautiful way to not be so stir crazy. Or if they're feeling lonely, finding ways to connect. And I know Zoom isn't always the best way or kind of doing it, but people have been finding some interesting ways to find that social connection. So that's our emotion brain. And then the last player in our brain is our anxious brain. And anxious brain and anxiety brain, anxiety is part of our limbic system, and it's a small part, it's called our amygdala. It's back in the back part of our brain, and anxious brain has a job. Its job is to keep you safe. It's a built-in alarm system that's scanning any environment, and when it sees danger, it goes off. And its job is, when it sees that danger, is to get you to safety. And what's the best way to get anyone to safety is probably to avoid or get out of there. And so that's what anxiety is geared to do, is flight. But sometimes you can't flight, and then you have to fight. And what we know sometimes, if you get too much anxious energy, you might freeze. So we call that fight, flight, or freeze. So now what I'd love to do, that you kind of have an orientation and start thinking of your brain a little differently, I'm going to throw out some typical thoughts one might have during this pandemic. And take a minute on that piece of paper you might have brought or amongst yourself, just look at the thoughts and decide what part of your brain might this thought be coming from. So here we go. Thought number one. There is no way I can find a job anymore. COVID-19 has made the market just too competitive. You stink. You will never be able to get any job. I know working out helps me focus on getting my work done. I should work out more. You will get COVID-19 if you go for a run. Stay inside. You are really letting everyone in your lab down by not producing enough papers. So these are the thoughts. Take a minute. Try to figure out which part of our brain might these thoughts be coming from. Our smart brain, our coach, our emotion brain, or our anxious brain. So let's go through them really fast. There is no way I can find a job anymore. COVID-19 has made the market just too competitive. I would say that's an anxious thought. Anytime, again, anxiety is always going to tell you the danger that can happen, why to avoid, what can go wrong. And again, there is maybe a little bit of reality to it, but there's also when we kind of are very strong that it's definitely going to happen, it's probably more anxiety. You stink, you will never be able to get any job. It depends on how you see that. If it's, again, your anxiety trying to get you to avoid, but I kind of see this as my coach trying to motivate me. So it does depend on your frame of reference. What if you view it as a bad motivation speech, it's a coach. If you see it as a warning sign of what can go wrong, it's your anxiety. I know working out helps me focus on getting my work done. I should work out more. That's your smart brain. You will get COVID-19 if you go for a run. Stay inside. Again, back to kind of that same frame. To me, that's an anxious thought. That again, what can go wrong and the danger and why to do something that my smart brain wants me to do, that's anxiety. You are really letting everyone in your lab down by not producing enough papers. That's your guilty coach, trying to guilt you into motivation to do more work around your lab. But why focus on anxiety right now? And the big reason to focus on anxiety is that it's really omnipresent, as we talked about. It's an important thing, but it can definitely become debilitating in a lot of the population. And if you look at estimates that 1 in 5, anxiety is at a point, that anxious system, that it's impeding your ability to live, love, or laugh. And again, that 1 in 3 people are going to be dealing with anxiety. And then the other thing to know is that anxiety is one of the most treatable conditions that we know the most to do with. And that's why it's a shame if we don't teach these things to make a difference. And it can really get in the way, especially in things we care about, like career advancement, which we'll talk about. And then the last thing is that we know anxiety and this thing called depression are pretty overlapping. And a lot of times, if you know you deal with depression, sometimes treating this underlying anxiety can eliminate a lot of the things that people deal with depression. So that's why we're going to focus more on anxiety. And as we said, anxiety is omnipresent, but just to prove it, I took this study from Harvard. And if you don't deal with anxiety in your life, you will see 4 dolphins playfully playing in the water right now. But if you see anything but 4 dolphins playing in the water, then you deal with anxiety. And people have seen all sorts of things. I mean, one of them I've even heard Star Wars characters or Jedis. And because it's your brain has changed and this chemical that goes in your brain is now having you see things. And again, if you don't see 4 dolphins, you're in the right place and this talk will be germane. But if you do see 4 dolphins, this talk might not be as helpful for you. So why we know that everyone is not seeing 4 dolphins is because we talked about anxiety has a functional and biological rationale for being there. And this is what it was designed to do. That if I did throw this into your room right now, a cobra, your anxiety system would take over. And it would make some split-second decisions. And that would be, am I getting out of here and running from the cobra, which would probably be the best? And if I can't run, what are my weapons to kill the cobra? And if I can't, some of you might know that's what you should be doing, running or looking at weapons, and some of you might freeze. So that phenomenon would happen. And that's what anxiety was designed to do. It was designed to try to protect us from cobras. That's what it evolved from anything that's sort of a threat that's in our face. But that's not usually the problem with anxiety. Here are some of the problems. The first problem with anxiety is that we developed, as we said, because we're humans, smart brains. So now there's things, instead of that we're biologically afraid of, there's things we're psychologically afraid of. We're afraid of things like failure. We're afraid of disappointment. We're afraid of being alone or rejected. We're afraid of being out of control. And those are the roots of all psychological anxiety. But here's the rub and what I've coined the irony of anxiety. That under conditions of psychological threat, our anxiety doesn't protect us from fears. It's going to make that fear come true. So you can see a picture of that right now, and imagine you had a test that you're afraid of failing, a big upcoming exam or whatever it might be. Or it could be a paper. So your anxiety system detects the threat and it views that threat as a cobra. And what's the best thing to do with cobras? As we said, to avoid. So imagine you avoid that paper. You clean, you play with your kids, you do all these other things, and you don't even talk about the paper because it's so scary and you don't want to fail the paper. And imagine you take that approach and you listen to your anxiety. What's going to happen with the paper you can't write? You're going to fail it. So anxiety now becomes the enemy. Let's put another context, and let's say it's social in nature. And anxiety is really afraid of being alone. So here's what it tells you, because it wants you to avoid. Don't go to parties. Don't talk to people. Don't be the real you. Don't let people get in. Don't let people get to know you. So again, you listen to your anxiety and you avoid. When it comes to this fear of being alone, if you do all that avoidance, what's going to happen? You're going to wind up alone. So in certain contexts, anxiety is really good. And in others, anxiety now becomes the enemy that we have to figure out how to overcome. And another thing that's really hard right now, let's talk about COVID-19. And our anxiety system was designed to help protect us from threats like a cobra that we can see, that are tangible in nature, that are right in front of us, because that's what we grew up with, or the evolutionary grew up with, and it knows how to handle that. But this new thing that's a biological threat that we can't see, that we don't really understand and know all the things to do, our anxiety system is having a hard time to know what exactly to do with. And yet it is a biological threat. And therefore, all the things that we want to do to protect us from biological threats and all the recommendations are important, but it's not completely on you at all times. It's not a cobra. And your anxiety system doesn't know how to do well with that. And so that's one of the challenges many of us are facing right now, or many of our anxiety systems, is how do I deal with a threat I can't see that could be deadly and it is impacting part of the population, but not everyone. And we're seeing that tension carried out in all the news cycles and everything. But what I've seen, and kind of then to classify, what has anxiety done to people with underlying anxiety? What has happened during COVID-19? And I'm going to capture that in some of the movies that I grew up with. And so the first movie that I grew up with was the movie Die Hard. And there's a great scene in Die Hard where Bruce Willis throws this body out of the building onto the police car and shoots up to the police car. And he says, "Welcome to the party, pal." And what he meant by that, again, and what I'm seeing with anxiety, is that some people with underlying anxiety are actually feeling a little better because the world is now getting more anxious around them. The world is recognizing the threat they always recognized and is acting more anxious, and that feels comforting. So some people have felt comforted by the party, not by the party, by the pandemic. Their anxiety at least has felt comforted. Other people, next movie I kind of grew up with was Crocodile Dundee. And there's a great scene in Crocodile Dundee where Crocodile Dundee opens up, he's confronted with a guy and he says, "Give me your money," because he has a knife. And Crocodile Dundee takes out his bigger knife, his machete, and says, "That's not a knife, this is a knife." And again, what anxiety is trying to do is to take more ownership in their brain. So some people have gotten more anxious during COVID-19, have really started to, their anxiety system is controlling them even more. And they're really worried about getting it for loved ones and all that. So their anxiety has grown. There's another group that I'm calling the Wizard of Oz group. And that's this notion that a lot of our anxiety was based on social things we need to do. That includes being at work. That can include talking to people. That can include being out, having to deal with our boss more. So being home and sheltering in place has actually reduced their anxiety because they don't have to deal with it. They're in Kansas, and there's no place like home. And this is the group I kind of worry the most about because eventually we're going to have to leave Kansas. And now it's been 2 or 3 months since we've been working our anxiety skills and doing in environments and working on how to be there, and it will be harder to restart. And then overall, what I've noticed that most people I've talked to, I think everyone, has someone they love and they care about who they're worried about being sick or getting sick or maybe passing away due to this. So I'm capturing that in the movie Grumpy Old Men. So what I'd love to do is take a minute and think about what movie category do you fall in and just send that to the chat as well. Do you think you fall into the Die Hard group, the Crocodile Dundee group, the Wizard of Oz, the Grumpy Old Men, or any combination? Or if none of that fits and another movie fits, feel free to share that. But again, would love for you to share as we move forward. What do you think anxiety has happened to your anxiety system as it's been trying to deal with COVID-19? And again, this thing you can't really see, that's a biological threat. Awesome. And I love them coming in and just keep sending them. So now, as you're doing this, there are a couple of things also to know about anxiety. And the first thing to know about anxiety is think of anxiety like a fire. In any condition, whenever we listen to our anxiety and we do what it wants us to do, we are strengthening that connection and making our anxiety grow. Whether it's right to grow or not, in any condition, whenever we follow what our anxiety wants us to do, we're making that connection stronger. And so anytime you listen to your anxiety, it's like you're throwing gasoline on the fire. And the problem with that is if we keep putting gasoline on the fire, what could eventually happen to a fire that keeps on getting gasoline? It can keep then spreading. It can start to burn out of control. And that's where a lot of kind of parents and we go wrong, is we think, hey, if I just do this one thing for my anxiety, if I just avoid doing this one paper, I'm gonna feel better and my anxiety will go down. I won't be so stressed. And that's a good thing. But again, that's how we've taught our anxiety to deal with things, is by avoidance. So I'm gonna show you another slide of that. You can see it more graphically. And you can see how this happens. Our anxiety starts to grow as the fire gets brighter and we're getting closer to that event that's making us anxious. And then we avoid and listen to our anxiety. And again, our anxiety immediately drops and we feel better. But the problem is, that's what we've taught ourselves how we deal with anxiety, which is to avoid. And so the next time we're confronted with a situation that makes us anxious, we're gonna have the desire to avoid, and that's what we wanna do. And we get caught up in that first loop. And again, our anxiety never gets better. If anything, it gets stronger and keeps claiming more space. And what we want to learn to do with anxiety and how we put water on anxiety is we wind up figuring out, how do we do what our anxiety doesn't want us to do? How do we, again, take control and not let that anxiety system take over? And the more we do it, that's the antidote to anxiety. The other things that put fire on the gasoline, it's called accommodation, is anytime we change environments so we don't have to feel anxious. Another one is things that we're anxious around. We usually develop what's called a safety behavior. So I'm very comfortable talking about my anxiety, and my anxiety doesn't want me to blow up on airplanes. So it's asked me to do a lot of safety behaviors when I fly, like check how long the airplane, how old the airplane is, to make sure I step on the airplane with my right foot, to make sure I look at the pilots and that they're the right age, to make sure I scan that there's kids on the plane, because that's a safe thing if kids are on, because God would never take kids. These are all safety behaviors which actually add gasoline. Another one too is reassurance. So those are the things, whenever you get reassurance, you're unintentionally stoking that fire. And I want to try to encourage people to try to stop from today stoking that fire and learning to put water on it. And again, it's a little more okay to do that with biological threats, but really when it comes to the psychological threats, we're causing, again, our worst fears to come true when we let that fire grow. So building on that metaphor, how can you start to be aware of whether anxiety is showing up in your life? So again, we're going to talk about, as we move through a little bit more down, about some of the ways anxiety might show up in our body. But we're going to get bodily cues. It might be heart rate going up. It might be our chest. It might be feeling tension. It might be feeling warm in certain places in our body. And we might know it's anxiety, or we might not be aware. But to start to pay attention when those things happen. If you asked for a lot of reassurance around an activity, you probably have anxiety around it. If you wind up repeating yourself or getting really locked in, if you can't think about anything else, you are probably anxious about it, because remember, if there's a cobra in the room, you don't want to think about anything else. So locked in thinking is a really big sign you might be anxious about it. But a really good one for you to be aware of, if there's something on your to-do list that's been on there for 3 days and you know you need to take care of it and you haven't, I now want you to have that light bulb to go off and go, maybe this is anxiety. And again, if we are not making the advancement we want in our career, to start to wonder, is anxiety getting in the way of some of that? So again, the next metaphor before we jump into the tools and get more pragmatic is the next metaphor is we're in Colorado, is think of anxiety a lot like skiing. And how we put that water on the fire is we want to learn some tools that help us know how to ski. I have kids, and I wouldn't put my kids on the mountain if they didn't know how to stop, to turn, and also to get up. Because it's really annoying if your kid can't get up to have to keep skiing back up to them and help them get up. So there might be some basics I want them to learn, but once they have those skills, I want them to keep getting on the mountain. I want them now to practice, and I want to set the level that's appropriate. I want to start at the bunny hill. I want them getting good at it. I want them getting comfortable and then moving up the ladder. And that's what we know is really important for anxiety treatment, is that it has this element of some skills that help us deal with anxiety, but then built in, there's a skiing component. And in the anxiety world, that skiing component is called exposure work. And exposure work is where we do what it is that makes you anxious and keep practicing it over and over. And the same is true, just think about it, if skiing, if all you and I ever did was talk about skiing, if I had you visualize, how good of a masterful skier could you ever become if all we do is talk about it? So when we combine those elements of skills in doing, how effective are we at helping people? And this is a recent meta-analysis of 30 years of data with kids, actually. And it's what, again, 5 decades of research tells us about the effects. And when we know that these kind of components are part of anxiety treatment, we have an effect size of 0.61, which means that 3/4 of people who get this kind of treatment benefit to a place where their anxiety becomes much more manageable. And out of all the mental health issues we deal with, we're the best at helping people who are anxious. So what are these basic ski skills I want you to have? And then we're going to start skiing together. So the first ski skill I want you to have kind of corresponds to this program I built called Learning to Face Your Fears. And each step is an acronym of skills we want you to have. So we're going to go through those now. The first set of skills corresponds to feeling. And again, we want to start with feelings, and here's why. It comes back to this notion, what do you do when you're hungry? You eat. And so we want to be able to recognize and let our feelings sort of be some of our guide of what we need and what we need to do. So again, we want to help have that awareness that, oh, I'm feeling anxious. Back to that first step, we want to identify it and categorize that my worry brain is going off. And we'll talk about here, or let's go now. Here are some of the signs that you want to start to be aware of how you might know you're anxious. And they're just kind of fall into the same ways you might know you're hungry. First off, your body's going to let you know. Second, your thoughts might let you know, or your actions or other feelings. And we can do this with any need or feeling state, but I want you to pay attention to anxiety because that's what the talk is about, and anything related to fight or flight. So stomach, headache, tension, feeling hot in your core, sweating, heartbeat are all signs, a lump in your chest are all signs of most likely an anxious response. Anxious behaviors, anything that's involved with procrastination or avoidance, we talked about that 3-day rule. When you notice these things, I want that light bulb now to go off more, oh, I'm anxious. And remember, anxious thoughts are going to tell us what can go wrong and the danger, and they're going to get locked in on the threat, on that cobra. And so if you can't shake a party, after a party, if you can't let go what something happened or what your boss said or whatever it is, to start to be aware, oh, I'm having an anxious response. And other feelings, if you might not realize that go along with anxiety, whenever you say you're stressed, overwhelmed, upset, frustrated, or angry, there might be some anxiety to go along with that. But once we have that light bulb go off, one of the things that can be helpful with anxiety is to learn to put numbers to it from 1 to 10. Because we might start to do different things based on those numbers. If our anxiety's at a 10, we might need to do some more calming skills, which we're about to talk about, than if our anxiety's at a 1. Or we might need to do some different things. So learning to put numbers to how strong of an anxious response can be really helpful. And then once we do that, the next thing we need to do is to have tools that calm down our anxious physiology. Because if our anxious physiology gets too high, our anxious brain is going to take over by design. If a cobra is 2 feet away from you, you don't want to have your smart brain. You want to get more reactive. You want to do things quickly. And so we need our smart brain to interrupt this anxious process. And so if you find, and that's where scaling can come in, if you start to find your anxiety above a 5 or 6, you're going to want to start to reduce your physiological arousal. And so when I scanned the literature and kind of combed, I found a bunch of things, and this isn't exhaustive, but it's pretty exhaustive, of ways to reduce our physiological arousal to help get our smart brain back. And as you can see, they fall into these kind of 4 categories. Things that involve using our body, things that involve using our mind, things that involve using our senses. And you can notice for some people, it's actually instead, they might need to remove themselves from some of these things. They might need a little more quiet to get their smart brain back. And then the last is things that help us get it out. And here are the rules to what I call a good calming skill. And if any of the things you might use meet these rules, then feel free to continue to use them. So the first off, it has to work to calm you down. The next thing, it can't draw attention to yourself. So some of us are really doing that howling thing, and screaming and howling is actually a way to calm yourself. But if you did that outside of COVID from 8 o'clock to 8:03 in public, that would draw a lot of attention to yourself. So off the list. It has to be safe. It has to be portable. So we need some that are portable. If your green blankie at home wrapping yourself up helps you calm down, that's great, but green blankie can't come with you everywhere. And then the big one that's a little different with anxiety is it can't lead to avoidance. So distraction and taking 5 minutes is a really great way to calm you down. But if 5 minutes of a Netflix show, and I've been watching Ozark, if 5 minutes of Ozark to calm yourself down when you're anxious leads to 4 episodes, leads to a night of missing doing work, then distraction might not be a tool for your repertoire. But we want everyone to have at least 2 that they can use, that they have in their system that works for them. And so I'm going to go through, I'm looking at the time, and we have a little time. I want to go through one today. And one of the most powerful ones we have that we can take with us anywhere is our breath. And our breath has the capacity to rev us up or calm us down. And the breath that helps us calm down is called diaphragmatic breathing. So I want to teach you how I teach diaphragmatic breathing. And what I want you to do is, it's lunchtime, and I know we've been all kind of maybe missing certain foods or things. I want you to think about the most yummy lunch you can imagine right now. So for me, that's nachos from El Camino. They're my favorite place to get nachos. And I want you to picture whatever that food is. And if you're quickly still by your phone, or sorry, by the chat function, feel free to chat it in, what you're craving right now, what that food is. And we're going to breathe in that food through our nose. And then what we're going to do is blow out like we would on hot soup. So a good diaphragmatic breath should sound something like this. And look if you can see me. Now all do that with me. Breathe in that yummy food. Blow out on hot soup. Breathe in that yummy food. Blow out on hot soup. Breathe in that yummy food. Blow out on hot soup. And hopefully that felt kind of calming. And so again, my rule for all of you, if you don't have 2 ways to calm yourself, take a picture of this list. We'll have the slides up. You can read more, but finding 2 that work for you. And feel free to be a free agent, even if you have 2. Try some of these out. Mindfulness, meditation, grounding. Try some of these and see how they work for you and if they work a little better. Then what we want to do is after we calm ourselves down and we have our smart brain back, then the work of anxiety begins. And the first step we want to do with anxiety is to acknowledge it. And this is a really important step. And we can acknowledge our anxiety with some sort of internal statement like, I hear you, worry brain. I hear you, anxiety, telling me. And why this is so important is let's go back to remember anxiety's job, which is to protect us from cobras. So imagine I threw a cobra into the room right now. And I said to you, don't pay attention to it. Just listen to me and keep watching the presentation. How good of a job do you think your anxiety would let you do with that challenge? Not good at all, because there's a cobra in the room, people. So we have to acknowledge the threat in the room. We have to acknowledge our anxiety. And if we don't, it's not going to not worry, it's going to worry more. So if you've ever heard the advice, block your anxiety out, pretend it's not there, it's actually the worst advice you can do and will probably make your anxiety worry more. So the first thing we want to do is acknowledge what our worry brain is telling us. So I'm going to throw out a couple scenarios that would probably get anyone's worry brain going off. And again, think in your head, what is your worry brain telling you right now if that scenario were to happen? So scenario number 1, or if you want to chat it in the chat function. You get an email from your boss marked urgent saying, see me right now, we need to talk. What is your anxiety telling you right now? So my worry brain is telling me, oh crap, what did I do wrong? Who did I piss off? How am I getting fired? What danger is going to happen? But what is your anxiety telling you? And then the next scenario is, surprise, you need to sing the national anthem tonight, and it's going to be recorded and played throughout the whole country. Every time that the national anthem is played, they're going to hear your rendition of it. What is your anxiety telling you right now? And that's your worry brain, and we want to acknowledge it. And once after we acknowledge it, then we want to learn how to poke holes in it. And here are some of the things, again, when I scanned the literature, done my own work, and built this model, here are kind of the 4 bigger tools, and then there's many tools under them. But the 4 best ways to challenge anxiety is we can always challenge anxiety with perspective. Anxiety loses perspective. And so here are some ways to give it perspective. Is again, we can use a scale from 1 to 10, but now the anchor, instead of being how it feels to us, the anchor can be a life or death scale. So a 10 is a cobra at your feet about to strike. So asking yourself when you're in a situation, so let's say the situation is, I want you right now to ask someone out, to text them to ask them out. That might make you really anxious, but on a life or death scale, what is that really? That might be a 2 or 3. So being able to say, hey, anxiety, it's a 2 or 3, you need to chill out and calm down. We got this, we're okay. The next thing we can do with anxiety is, again, anxiety in that perspective based is always going to focus on what can go wrong in the danger. So another way to give it perspective is to focus on what can go right. What are the positives that can happen? Anxiety, another way to challenge it, lacks evidence. It always presents things without any proof or evidence. So using your scientific brain, you can look for the evidence or proof of what is anxiety really telling you. And again, I use that a lot with my own anxiety. It always tells me I'm going to blow up on an airplane. And I always look at the evidence. Is you've told me that every time I fly. And what is the actuality that that's going to happen? Another way to challenge our anxiety is with values. And we can use our value system of what's important to help us override our anxiety. And then the last one that we can do is anxiety is going to use tricks against us. So just like the Tricks Bunny Rabbit commercial, when you start to become aware of the tricks anxiety is trying to use against you, and you call them out, they lose their power to be effective. And here are the ones I've seen mostly during COVID that anxiety has been using to try to keep people in a perpetual state of anxiety. One is, the first I see is these A to Z worry tricks. It tries to worry way off into the future. 10 months from now, what's the world going to be like? How am I going to adapt? When again, that is something, but it's so far in the future and so much can change. Spending energy worrying about it is probably not going to be helpful. Deep down, it loves to say, deep down, you know the truth. You're not going to get a job. Deep down, you know no one likes you. Or some variation of that. You don't believe what you're saying right now. You know the truth. You're going to blow up on that airplane. It loves to be a broken record, meaning it loves to just repeat itself. And then a lot of times with people who are more successful, anxiety might not be an in-your-face, hey, I'm anxious right now and I should avoid. Anxiety might just try to get you to focus on that shiny object and get you to distract. Like, hey, what am I having for dinner tonight when you should be working on your paper? You know, I'm kind of feeling hungry. Let me eat dinner first and prepare a good dinner, and then I'll work on my paper. And it gets you to get caught up in the shiny object to the point you avoid. And then another one, it really uses your body against you. Feeling achy, feeling short of breath. And when you feel that, you're like, okay, I listened to you, anxiety. I'm having anxious feelings right now, so I won't watch that movie, or I won't do what's making me anxious. And anxiety's learned then, that's what weapon I should play or what trick I should play to control me. So I want you to think about what tricks is anxiety using against you that are effective, and we want you to start calling out those tricks. And I'm going to pick up the pacing just a little bit because I'm aware of the time. And so the next thing is, after we poke holes in anxiety arguments, then we have to do what our anxiety doesn't want us to do. And what we found is, here are some tools that help us do what our anxiety doesn't want us to do. The more we practice stuff or learn about stuff that makes us anxious, that can decrease our anxiety. So if I don't think I'm good at giving presentations, if I don't think I'm good with interviewing, the more I practice, the more I learn about good interview tips, how to come across polished, how to answer certain questions, and those skills. And I can go to Google now. That's a very different thing. When I was growing up, it was much harder to learn things. You can learn anything at your fingertips. Taking time to learn and grow instead of avoiding is really important. Thinking about what helps us be courageous, what's our motivation, and then also too, breaking things down to smaller parts. When things are new or overwhelming, the more we can break them down to stair steps and small manageable parts are really helpful. And then back to whatever our anxiety is worried about, we can come up with solutions that don't involve avoidance. And then after that, then we want to do what our anxiety wants us to do. And then the last part of this work is we want to close the cognitive loop. And that seems to be really important from a learning perspective to whenever we do something that makes us anxious, then we want to look back and see if our anxiety was right. And typically, most of the time we'll see our anxiety was wrong, or it might be right. And then we can look at, I survived and can do it again. And then the last thing we want to see is anxiety doesn't like to lose and it likes to be in control of the band. And so one of the ways it maintains control is this trick of punishing you after you do something it doesn't want you to do. And so we want to be on the lookout for that punishment and stop it from working by not letting it be a sore loser and calling out its tricks. And then the last part we don't have a lot of time to talk about today is standing up to anxiety is really hard. It's you're fighting millions of years of evolution and a system that really thinks it's trying to keep you safe. And so having motivation, having things that help you do that work is really important. But now let's put this into practice. So remember way back about an hour ago, I asked you all to go to that fridge and find a food that grosses you out. And so for me, I have, as you can see, my Kalamata olive, and it's here. And I'm really not looking forward to this challenge. I've been eating a lot of them. It's getting easier, but they're still disgusting. What I want you to do, if you haven't, quickly run to your fridge and find something that's grossing you out. And if you don't have anything in your fridge, if there's anything around the house that you still have food-wise that just sounds kind of gross to your anxiety. Or because of time, we would do both, but we're just gonna, you could pick one. Or if you would rather, my goal is again to help you overcome your anxiety is to text someone the following. I am trying to overcome my anxiety about blank and asking them, can you help me by doing blank? I'm trying to overcome my anxiety about this paper. Can you help me by, and being very clear, checking in with me? Can we have virtual paper sessions? I'm having anxiety about the job market. Can we talk about opportunities? I'm having anxiety about asking for a raise at work because of what's going on. Can you help me by role playing it? So think of whatever you want to do, either a text challenge, a food challenge, or both. So text and eat at the same time, but I'm going to walk you through it. So question number one, how high is your anxiety meter right now as you're about to do this? So my anxiety is at a 4, I would say, but feel free to type in what your anxiety is at. And now that you wrote that down, then to kind of see, is my smart brain still here or is my anxious brain taking over? And if your anxious brain is taking over, then we want to jump to one of those calming skills. If your smart brain is still here, we can proceed, but let's just take a minute. And I'm going to combine two of my favorites. I'm going to breathe and I'm going to visualize a beach in a place that's really soothing and calming to me. So take a minute and do whatever you need to calm down. Now, let's think about what is your worry brain telling you about this challenge? It's going to be gross. It's going to taste nasty. It's going to make me throw up. The aftertaste, it's going to ruin food for the rest of the day. Whatever it's telling you, I'm going to be worry brain, and you have to talk back to me. So here we go. That's your job, to try to talk back, but I'm going to be your worry brain. Don't do this challenge. It's going to be too gross. So I might say my mission in life is to not let you control me. This is me standing up to you, worry, and I'm going to do it. You can't stop me. Next one. Oh, it's definitely going to make you throw up. Don't do it. What could you say back to that? I'm going to say, where's your evidence? Where's your proof? Next one. Deep down, you know, whether there's no evidence or proof, this is not a good idea. Don't do it. What could you say back? I'm going to say, I know your tricks, anxiety. That deep down trick used to work against me. I'm not going to let it work. So we've just talked back to our worries. Now we're going to do the challenge, and we're going to look at those charge skills. So there, even with this challenge, we could go to Google to make it easier, but I'm not going to tell you how. But there are ways to eat food that take the taste out. But I'm not going to do it because I want to really challenge my anxiety. But I am going to do that problem-solving one. So I did grab Mia, you heard, opening a bubble water to help me challenge my anxiety for aftertaste. I'm still going to eat it. That's the challenge. But I do have some water on hand. And that's how I'm problem solving. Feel free to grab any problem solving you need. And then I will ask myself, what helps me be brave? And I want to keep living in a world that teaches my kids that anxiety shouldn't boss them. So I'm doing this for my kids. And think about the same thing in relation to the text challenge. And let's go, folks. Cheers. Bottom up. Oh. Great job, folks. You all just did your first exposure. And remember the last part, don't forget it. Anxiety doesn't like to lose. So is it trying to punish you right now? And how can you stop it? Mine actually is pretty quiet, but you might be feeling things in your body. It might say, yes, but you could do this right now, but you can talk to your boss because it wants you to focus on the things you can't do to stay in control. The other thing is to look at whether your anxiety, you said, was right or wrong. So my anxiety was wrong in that this was more of a 2. It thought it was going to be a 4, and it was more tolerable than I thought, and it was wrong in that way. And I'm still standing. So now let's brace this and kind of take a minute and kind of talk about it in terms of career. And how does anxiety get in the way of our career pursuits? And these are sort of the 5 parts when we look at career theory that people might be dealing with. And none of you are dealing with retirement. I don't think so. But I do want to throw it out there. It can impact the career we choose and the careers we explore. It can impact whether we choose or what choice we make around our career and whether we feel like we can change careers or not. Anxiety can get in the way of a lot of different things. And so that's where that paper kind of comes out, is take a minute, or if you want to add to your chat, now that you think about it, how is anxiety getting in the way of your own career advancement? Is it keeping you from networking? Is it keeping you from reaching out to top tier people in your field? Is it keeping you in your field and not really going after what you want? Is it keeping you from advancing in your lab? Is it keeping you from giving presentations, which is hurting you? Think about how might it be getting in the way. And then what we want to do is then, just like ski slopes, to start thinking about how can I start practicing skills and working up my own personal ski mountain to achieve my goals. And we want to build action plans around that. We want to look at what are the goals, what might be getting in the way, but we really want to start doing exposures. And if you think of it like skiing, what would be starting on the bunny hill, what would be working its way up. And I forgot one slide that you can see that, but you can literally build a mountain. And the fancy term for that is called a hierarchy, where we build ski mountains around our personal things. So imagine it is giving a presentation. You could think about what makes presentations easier or harder. The number of people, how receptive, how knowledgeable the people are in the room, whether it's virtual or not. Those are all things that might impact. And then what we could do is talk about what might be some bunny slopes. Maybe watching people give presentations would not be anxiety provoking at all. Maybe watching people on YouTube give bad presentations or failing might be some bunnies. Maybe doing it in front of a mirror yourself might be a bunny. Then maybe a green one might be doing it around a topic you know to, again, if it makes you more anxious to do it to strangers, then that might be a blue run. Or if it makes you less anxious, that might be a green run, thinking about the people. Then we want to go to a blue run and do some blue runs, which might be adding the level of complexity, time, people. Then we might get to some black runs and some double black runs. And think about it, if you want to wind up being at a blue level, and you start skiing double black runs, then skiing blues start getting easier. So in the exposure world, when we work with people with anxiety, that's why sometimes we will pick to do things well and above our anxiety, because then it makes the everyday stuff a lot easier to do. So now I want you to think about building or thinking about, and you can even share, that would be awesome, what are some exposures that you think might be good for you to help you with your own career advancement? Especially as you start thinking about how anxiety and whatever you wrote is impacting your career. And really, these are the things, if you want to achieve your goals, remember that irony of anxiety is it's so afraid of failure that when it controls you, you're more likely going to fail than when we can figure out how to face it and overcome it. So again, please type what it is that might be some good exposures for you. Awesome. And now what I'd like you to do is just some final tips before we open it up for questions. But here's some mottos that I'd love for people to take from today. How do I prepare myself now to fight anxiety rather than sparing myself? To remember that anxiety, again, is like skiing. And it doesn't mean I stay off the mountain when I'm anxious. It means I start and I start tackling the mountain. And to really think about all the skills you heard about today, and when are you going and how are you going to incorporate that practice into your life? When am I going to practice calming myself? When am I going to practice talking back and building in these rituals? And that might be, again, whenever I go for a walk, I'm going to listen to my words and talk back. Before, when I wake up in the morning, I'm going to do some anxiety work. And to really focus on the things that anxiety might be getting in the way of career advancement. And one of the metaphors I didn't talk about today, but I talk a lot about that anxiety is a lot like Voldemort. And everyone is sort of afraid to talk about Voldemort in Harry Potter. And they wanted to call him he who must not be named. But the more we let our anxiety be he who must not be named, the more it controls us. The more we name it as Voldemort and fight, that's how we overcome Voldemort. And remember, at the end, It really did take everyone battling together to overcome, and think about who's in your village that you can recruit like you just did. If you ate the food, maybe you didn't, but I would still encourage you to invite more people into your battle, to make them aware that you're trying to fight at this time and how they might be able to help you. And then remember, if you're a parent and you have kids, just to remember that if you learn some things today too, these are things you might want to figure out how to teach your kids. And before, again, back to skiing, before you get them on the mountain, do they have the requisite skiing skills to be effective? And then if they do, remember your job as a parent then is to keep putting them on the mountain, especially when it comes to psychological threats, and helping them develop. Another thing is we want them practicing, and then we want you to stop stoking the fire and decrease accommodation and breaking avoidance. And then the other thing that we've learned is, again, the more reactive we are as parents, and the more we keep focusing on what makes us anxious, and that's kind of what the media is doing right now. It's really focusing on all the bad that can happen and the danger, and it's true. But when our brain is already anxious and all we do is keep stoking anxiety, it's not healthy. And we want to balance what we're seeing that can make us anxious with what good that could happen. What could help me? What is good overall? And so that's where I'd also caution too right now, when and how much media you're consuming during COVID-19, because that is going to be anxiety priming. And if your anxiety is really off the charts, if it's really getting in the way of your ability to kind of function right now, know that we have your back at the Depression Center. I have your back. Reach out. We're going to probably start in a couple weeks another round of anxiety groups for people, and it'll be virtual, but ways to keep practicing, learning these skills and doing it together. But if it's really starting to get in the way of your life, if you're really noticing more Crocodile Dundee, or you're in Kansas and know Kansas is going to be over, and you want to be ready for when Kansas is over, to know that's an option. At the same time, or one more thing to know, there's a great TED Talk. That's a guy who figured out how to overcome anxiety on his own. We don't have time to watch it, but you can type in on TED Talks, "What I Learned from 100 Days of Rejection," or Jia Zhang's name, and you can watch this beautiful talk of a man who realized that his fear of disappointment, of rejection, was getting in the way of him being a good CEO. So he set out on his own to get rejected 100 days straight and to learn from that rejection. And so he put all these things in place, and he overcame his anxiety about rejection. And I hope you watched the video, but one of my favorites is he went to a fast food restaurant, and he said, "Can I get a refill of burgers? Because you refill drinks, why not refill burgers?" And I thought that was a very creative, funny way to get rejected. But what are some other resources? There's this great website called the International OCD Foundation. And OCD used to be, it is an anxiety disorder. In our language now, it's not thought of, it's thought of as an impulse, but I still think of it as an anxiety disorder. And you can read a lot about exposure treatment and what works. The Anxiety and Depression Association of America too. And as I said, we want to be a resource. And the last thing I'd love before we open it up to questions, and you all have been great, and thank you so far, is I do hope learning has occurred. And so one of the ways I know that learning occurred is I call it the stoplight model. And with the stoplight model, I ask people to think about, based on today, what's something you might stop doing in your life? Something that you kind of heard that you're going to stop doing based on what you heard. Maybe I'm not going to avoid as much. Maybe I'm not going to accommodate. Whatever it is. One thing, pat yourself on the back that you're proud that you're doing. Oh, it's good to hear I'm doing that. Someone else says it's a good idea. That's what I call a yellow light, something you're going to keep doing. and something you might start doing based on the talk today. And I would love it if you flood Bruce right now with one thing from any of these categories, just to know that this was a worthwhile talk and helpful for you all. So please send that to him.
Scott, I'm actually going to, for this, I'm going to open it up and allow people to post to each other. So if you would like me to share on your behalf, just select my name when you put it in the chat. If you want to share it with everyone, then you can just leave the to function as to everybody. But so you can just post those directly.
Awesome. And folks, now really want to open it up for questions. You've all taken quite a journey with me. I'm going to take another sip. I still feel that olive in my throat, but would love to answer any of your questions. We definitely have time.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. And then for anyone who feels that they have gotten what they want out of today, they don't want to stick around and ask questions, I will just ask that you complete the post-workshop evaluation that I just shared again. Unfortunately, you'll have to copy and paste that into your browser, but I do hope you take advantage of some of this time just to ask Scott your specific questions. And then I will remind everyone that, again, we're going to keep these workshops going, and the next one will be on CVs and resumes on May 5th. And so this will be another time to address some of the challenges potentially that you may be facing right now when you're thinking about your careers. And hopefully this workshop will give you some information for how to confront some of those challenges. But we'll just open it up for questions. You can just type those right into the chat box and we will address them.
Awesome. And folks, that's one of those things, back to the skills, starting to see everything as a skill, and your resume and CV is a skill set, and how to put yourself in the best position. So the more you can attend things like that and learn from people or learn on your own, those are great ways to continue to reduce your anxiety. So I hope you partake in those.
Yes, I will send out. So apparently people can't copy and paste from the chat box and the link isn't linked. So I will send that out right after the workshop. I apologize for those technical difficulties. I will confront my anxiety around it so that I don't feel like this was a total failure simply because I messed up the end part.
So folks, back to another classic movie from the 80s that I grew up with. I'm going to say Bueller. Let's hear some questions. And I'd love, again, I think supporting each other at this time is really important. And if there's not even a question, if you just want to vent, this is a hard time. And if it's more emotion brain stuff too, we'll to get it out and take care of getting some out. Or if it's a strategy you found that's been helpful, whatever you want to share, we'd love to open it up to the 20 of you who are here. Sure. So one of the first questions I'll just read out. Can we go through some specific strategies for dealing with anxiety around the fear of not finding a job due to COVID-19? So I think part of this is sort of first kind of looking at your own anxiety, and first I would say looking at what the evidence might be, whether that's true or not true. And there is some evidence that that might be a harder prospect at this time. And then sort of really looking at your, what I would say, maybe starting to have some of those conversations with with whoever you're working with and mentors about what are some opportunities in the field to kind of help you figure out where might there be some job opportunities. Or maybe, because this is unprecedented times, are there some opportunities to stay and build up even more of a resume or CV for when this changes? Because I do think higher ed is one of the biggest institutions that are being impacted. And we don't know, there are a lot of securities with grant funding and stuff that some are known, but some of the soft money and things like that that universities are dealing with, there are some hiring freezes and things like that that may produce some more challenges. But those challenges can also maybe produce some opportunities within your current lab. If they can't hire new folk, maybe there's some opportunities to stay, some other options And that's where I'd really encourage you to really twofold. One, to have a mentor, someone who can help advise you and talk through some of these career challenges, but also to talk to your current employer and to understand what might be the context that you have to deal with. I don't know, Bruce, that kind of popped off me, but if you have any other suggestions that you would say that you might kind of advocate for people doing at this time during COVID, when you're right, the job market may be changing drastically over the next 6 months to a year.
Yeah, I think that the best advice that I would give specifically is that planning for additional time and talking to people early and often to think about those things is probably the best thing that you can do. This may be a time when you need to delay a career transition if that's possible. If it's not possible, the more time you give yourself to start reaching out to people, doing informational interviews, becoming more aggressive in your job search, I think those are the kinds of things that you do have control over. Again, I'll remind everybody that one of the things that I do is provide individual career coaching sessions. And if you ever want to talk about your strategy for making some of those transitions, as Scott, you were saying, I do think that even though higher education will not be spared from some of the challenges, we are in a different position than a lot of other companies. And I think a lot of it depends on the type of work that you do and recognizing that there is not going to be a single job landscape. For people who are, biomedical researchers who have some skill sets that may go into companies that are now tackling on COVID-19 vaccines or treatments, things like that, there are going to be potential opportunities to have more easy transitions to those sectors. So again, it's going to be individual. And I think using this time to really clarify what are you interested in and what are the kinds of things that, now that you really do have to focus on where do you want to move, is that within academia, is it outside academia? Using this time to have a little bit more of that clarity. But again, using those resources and talking to people is probably the best thing that you can do.
And one other thing, and then we'll move here, another great question around sleep that we'll throw out in a minute. But one of the things I will kind of share too, that a lot of times I've seen in the career world, we talk about these things called informal and formal networks. So formal networks are where you see jobs posted and you apply, or formal job offers, or things like that. Informal networks are, again, where you know people loosely, or there might not be jobs, but jobs can materialize. And I do think another strategy is just thinking about that this time, you're right, especially Bruce, that depending on the kind of job, it might be an easier market, but for some, but really thinking about a little more, what are my informal networks and how might I be able to talk and leverage them to maybe lead to some opportunities I wasn't aware of, where maybe in different markets, formal networks are easier, but I probably imagine informal networks are going to be even more important during this time. That the right call from someone you know to someone they know might be a big difference than just looking for jobs and applying. Yeah. So the next question that popped up is, again, having a lot of anxiety and the anxiety impacting sleep. And that's a really big one and could be another great topic all unto itself too. But one of the things people who are anxious do to manage their anxiety is to try to stay really busy and productive, to not feel their feelings and feel anxious. But the only time that that kind of happens then is right before they go to bed and they have to stop moving. And so there are definitely strategies to help with sleep. And one of the things to do is to go to Google and type in this term sleep hygiene. And there's a bunch of tips related to sleep. And start to think about what are the ones that can work for you or you might be willing to try. And so I'm going to go through a quick 5 of them, the top 5 I usually recommend. Number one, getting your phone out of your bedroom. That's really important. The phone is, again, too distracting. The light, there's a lot of reasons. And if you say, well, my phone is my alarm, buy an alarm and not have that be the function of your phone. Two, you want your bed to only be for sleep. So what that means is not doing other activities in your bed, not relaxing in bed, not lounging in bed, not working in your bed. You want to make your bed as the thing you do in your bed is sleep. And you also don't want your bed to be worry time. So if you've been in bed for 20 minutes and you can't fall asleep, get out of bed, try to do some form of a calming activity, and let yourself then go back into bed when you're feeling sleepy. And again, based on that notion I started with, another tip is, in my belief, in order for our brain to be able to sleep, we need to work through our feelings of the day and feelings overall. And we also need to know we have a game plan for tomorrow. So we don't have to do that, though, with sleep. So I might recommend about 2 hours before sleep, I recommend you have two things with you. One is a journal or a mechanism to get your feelings out. Two is whatever organization system you have. And so if that's a planner, if that's your phone, and during planning time, you come up with all the things you're worried about and your to-dos and how you're going to do it. And your emotion time, you're getting all your feelings out, and it makes it much easier to go to sleep. The last tip I'll throw out from the sleep hygiene world is no naps. Naps are the enemy of sleep because of the chemical. We build up a chemical in our brain, and when we sleep or nap, we reset that. And then the other is really to be aware of your caffeine intake and foods that might have caffeine, like chocolate. And many of us eat chocolate and stress eat at night, which might also impact your ability to sleep. So those are kind of 5 different things that you can try. But again, type in this term sleep hygiene and see if there's any others that you might be willing to try, and treat it like your own science experiment to try to improve your sleep. Great.
Hey, Scott,
yeah.
we have a question from a participant who'd like to ask it, so I'm going to unmute them so they can ask directly.
Great.
Hello. Hi, Scott.
Hi.
Thank you for this talk. It was very useful. I really appreciate it. So I have a question that it was kind of too long to type. So I was wondering if you can help us to talk a little about and recognize what I would call healthy anxiety versus bad anxiety, right? So I think anxiety is bad. I understand that, but I think up to a certain extent, it's not a bad thing to be a little anxious about some things, right? So, and I can give you an example, because this morning I took my dog for a walk, and it was beautiful, great weather, nobody was around, and I couldn't quite relax, because I was scanning the area to see if somebody was coming, and I couldn't relax. And then a coyote showed up, and so I thought, oh, that was a good thing that I couldn't relax, because my dog, which is like a small, medium-sized terrier, maybe was going to get killed. So, and then I came back, and then we had this talk, your talk, and I was thinking, okay, I need to find a balance. I need to find a way to balance what could be a good level of anxiety, and versus, a level that passes that healthy threshold. And so I was wondering two things. Do you agree that there is something that we can call healthy anxiety? And two, how do we find the balance between the two, the good and bad type?
Beautiful. So I would change the term, as you heard, I don't know if you heard from the beginning, But I would say there's functional, anxiety has a function. And its job is to try to keep you safe. And when it is motivating you, when it's preparing you, when it's getting you to do things, because if you didn't have any anxiety, you might not do, that's when it's working for you. But when it starts to be getting in the way of you living, getting in the way of you doing, when it's in that psychological area and getting you to avoid, it's probably moved into that what you might call unhealthy category. So I definitely agree with you. There is a job and there's a function for anxiety. We want to be able to have something to keep us safe, but when it starts to get in the way of these psychological areas, it can usually be more of the enemy. And I'm sorry, my camera is scanning in and out, so I apologize for that. But yes, it can have some good elements, good idea, some good elements and bad elements to it. And at the same time, we definitely want to be aware of when is it helping, when is it more of a biological threat that it's responding to, and when is it a psychological threat where it thinks it's helping, but it's probably getting in the way. So the example I gave for that, remember, if you is imagine your anxiety is worried about getting rejected. So it tells you not to go to parties, not to be social, because you don't want to get rejected and wind up alone. But it thinks it's helping you, but that's what's going to lead to you being alone. So there's times where your anxiety system in certain contexts are misguided. But there's definitely a healthy piece to it that it helps you know what you care about, and it can help you, again, fight and go after what you want. Great question. And I think we have time. We have time for more, but anyone else want to unmute and share or just share? And again, I would really encourage my final kind of take-home points. There were a lot, but especially during COVID-19, kind of be aware of how your anxiety might be impacting you. If you're walking around at every moment feeling like you're gonna get the virus, that it's gonna kill you, that's probably not a healthy way to be living. And it's not kind of based on the evidence. Doing what it is safe, doing all the social distancing and those guidelines is to keep everyone safe. But also too, I would say, really tuning in and taking care of the emotional side of your brain and making sure your emotions, you're taking care of those cravings and need, and really making sure your coach is kind of really set up for success right now. And then the last thing I'll say, I've been sharing with everyone who I work with, we are in the worst marathon ever. And the reason why it's the worst marathon is you don't know when it's going to be over or how it's going to be over. You haven't had time to prepare or train. You've been thrown into it. You have to run it alone. And running it the wrong way could end up killing you. And that's kind of the worst marathon. If I told you that's the marathon we're going to run, you would say, no way, I'm not signing up for that. And here we find ourselves. So the last piece of advice I just want to give you, especially during this time, is to continue to set a pace that allows you to be successful at this time. To make sure your pacing allows for you to be successful, and that we're in probably sort of the hardest part of the marathon, that you're off from the finish line and that kind of initial energy from starting the race is gone, but you can't see the finish line yet. And so just be really kind to yourself, set a pace that's manageable, and be gracious when you can't do everything at this time that you typically do.
Thanks, Scott. I think this was really great. I hope people found it helpful. Just as with all workshops, the idea is to present some strategies. Although no one will be a master at this after attending the workshop, all of this takes practice and time. And so I'd encourage you to reach out to each other, reach out to me, reach out to Scott. if you find that you need a little additional guidance or anything like that. And then he was just saying, be gracious with yourself as we go forward. So again, take advantage of the resources that are available. I hope to see you all at some future workshops. And in the meantime, take care, stay safe, and be healthy.